Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Super excited for this video as we're going to cover a Minnesota Timberwolves trade guide here on the channel, continuing our extensive trade guide series where we talk about all 30 NBA teams with specific team deep dives where we look at, hey, what's going on with this team? How good are they this year? What are they going to look to do at the trade deadline? And the Minnesota Timberwolves kind of gaining a little bit of a special place in my heart. For those of you who do not know, I'm actually a credentialed NBA reporter on the beat this year for the Minnesota Timberwolves. So I'm in the locker room, I'm at all of the home games, and I've had a really great close proximity to this organization this year. Because of that, I feel like this is a video I'm very excited for. So if you guys do want more Timberwolves content, I'm sure a lot of Timberwolves fans are watching this, go follow me on my personal Twitter. That will be in the description below. Be a great place to see all of the content that I post, Timberwolves related, obviously asking the players questions, asking Chris Finch questions, things like that. So that's a great place to be. But let's jump into it now with a video preview. What are we focused on in this video covering the Timberwolves this trade deadline? We're going to look at the current team situation. That's really the first important topic to discuss. How good is this team? What do I really think about them? Then from there, we'll look at their future draft picks. That gives us a good idea of, hey, how much flexibility does this team have to make deals at the deadline? How many picks do they have to trade? We'll look at their multi-year cap table and the trade pieces that they have this season. We'll look at who's under contract for quite some time, as well as some of those expiring deals that they have. We'll then focus on team needs and their current existing flaws that I think could become problematic come playoff time that maybe Tim Connolly and Matt Lloyd and that organization would look to improve upon this year at the deadline. We'll look at some of their potential trade targets that they could go out and acquire to fill some of those needs or flaws. And then we'll end the video with my final predictions. What do I actually expect the Timberwolves to do this trade deadline? Well, first with the current team situation, boy, is this team good. They've been a real blast to watch in person a ton this year. They've just dominated a bunch of different teams. Now they've had some, kind of weird losses, some tough games in there, but for the most part, they're really, really good. They're first in the Western Conference for a reason, and that reason is the #1 defense in the NBA. Rudy Gobert is a man on a mission. Honestly, the best defensive player I've ever seen play. Now, I am 24 years old. I grew up watching Ben Wallace, of course. I'm aware of what he does and what he was as a player, one of the best players ever. He's a 4-time Defensive Player of the Year, and I think Rudy Gobert is on pace to also become a 4-time Defensive Player of the Year. He already has 3 awards this year, or in his career, and I think this year will be his 4th, just with the way that he has played. On top of that, Karl-Anthony Towns has been flirting with a 50-40-90 season all year long. The free throw number just a little bit under 90% right now, but he's well above both 50% from the field and 40% from 3. He's honestly just a fantastic shot maker and one of the better shooting players in the NBA, not just shooting big man, he's just one of the best shooters in the league. He is that good, and over the last couple of weeks, he's been much more decisive, playing ready off the catch, and because of that, he's just playing, honestly, his best basketball, maybe of his career. Anthony Edwards has also taken a big step forward this season. I think the biggest area of growth that I've seen from him is his ability to spread the basketball around. Now, he's had a couple of double-digit assist games this year. I still wouldn't say he's a phenomenal playmaker for others, but I do think he's growing in that department, specifically on his ability to throw kick passes over to the corner. As Rudy Gobert rolls to the rim, often brings in a tag defender, and I think Edwards is doing a great job facilitating to the weak side of the floor with skip passes. That's something he's taken a big step forward in. The shot making, when he's on, it's unbelievable. He's one of the best shot makers in the league when he's got it going. At times, though, there's also kind of ebbs and flows where the shots aren't falling, and I think they're doing a good job trying to figure out ways to play around that. And hey, if he's not on that night, how do we look for other offense, especially for a team that, even though there's a lot of offensive talent, they haven't really meshed the way that you'd like. Towns and Gobert are a pretty good offensive pairing, in my opinion, with the way that their ability to play 45 action, big man to big man screens and lobs, which is so unique in the NBA right now. Just not really anything else we see on any other currently constructed team. They're really special, and then Edwards is also doing a better job finding Gobert a bit this season, has more assists to him this year than he did all of last season, so obviously their chemistry is growing a bit. I still think there's quite a bit of room for him to get better working with Gobert, but there's been a bunch of positive flashes. Mike Conley's been huge for this team all season long, captain clutch for a reason. Chris Finch said that post-game a couple of weeks ago. He's been the engine for their offense at the end of games. Side pick and roll with him and Rudy Gobert is just really, really darn good. Jaden McDaniels and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, both top-tier point-of-attack defenders. Of course, McDaniels gets a little bit more national recognition for it, but I think Nickeil Alexander-Walker is super underrated for what he does on the basketball and the defensive end of the floor. And this year, offensively, he's taken a pretty good step forward, initiating some offense for the Timberwolves and also being ready to catch and shoot. He's pretty reliable in those kind of smaller but needed roles, and I think the Timberwolves are a much better team with him on the floor than they are without him, honestly. I think when you have McDaniels, Edwards, Gobert, that's a really great combination of 4 defensive-minded players. Then Naz Reid, just, I mean, 2 words, right? Naz Reid, he's just so good. He's been a lot of fun to watch, and I think over the last couple of weeks, there's been moments where the consistency isn't there with him, and that's kind of the big difference between a player like him and Karl Anthony Towns, where Towns is just more talented than him, but there's not a slight there to Naz Reid. He's one of the best 6 men in the NBA. He's been phenomenal all season long for the Wolves, and at times he's been really the guy that's called upon to carry their offense in shifts and waves, and I think as he continues to grow as a player, he's still relatively young. I think there's going to be more and more room for him to improve, especially on the offensive end. And I think defensively, his activity has been better this season as well, which is really a big reason why the Wolves have been able to survive with Towns and Reid playing the 4 so often, is they've been very active and they've done a good job trying to contain the ball when they've been attacked off the dribble. Honestly, they're just a really talented team, and there's a lot to build upon, and going about trying to find trades, well, that's a little bit trickier for the Wolves, though. Their future draft pick situation after the Rudy Gobert trade is pretty bleak. They don't have a lot of tradable first-round picks, which is okay. They've already made their big splashy move getting Gobert, and it's obviously paid off. I was one of the few people who actually said that the trade was genius for the Timberwolves back when they made it. I know that was a very hot take at the time, but this is the team I expected to see from them when they made that deal. I thought, look, this team is really talented. They've got a bunch of all-NBA caliber players, bunch of all-star caliber players, and they've got really good surrounding pieces like McDaniels and Mike Conley. Now, at the time, they had D'Angelo Russell, who I expected to play a bit better. Obviously, now he's with the Lakers. We'll see how long that lasts, but the Wolves don't have a ton of draft picks because of the Gobert trade. They do own their own picks in 2024, 2028, and 2030. All of those are non-tradable, though, currently because of the Stepien rule. So they're kind of hamstringed a little bit here right now in terms of making any trades. They owe their 2026 first-round pick in a swap to the Jazz as well. And they also owe their 2025-2027 first unprotected to Utah and a 2029 first top 5 protected. So again, a lot of draft picks went out the door. They've already conveyed one of those in the 2023 draft to Utah. But listen, when you're top in the Western Conference, you're not really worried about those draft picks right now anyway. But for trade flexibility, it definitely does hurt. For most teams, I don't mention second-round picks, but I think with the Wolves' current team context, I think it's important to do so in this video. Their second-rounders, they have a 2024 second-rounder, which is the less favorable of Wizards and Grizzlies. So with both of those teams kind of pretty poor this season, they're not playing their best brand of basketball. Obviously, the Grizzlies, mostly because of injuries, and then the Wizards obviously just being bad this season as they kind of have chosen their new direction in their franchise, which I think is good for them long-term, by the way. It's just, that's going to be a relatively decent second-round pick in this year's draft. The Jazz second-rounder in 2025, we'll see where that one ends up, probably anywhere from 40 to 50 in the draft. 2026, they have the least favorable of Heat, Pacers, and Spurs, so that's probably their worst second-round pick on the screen right now, just given the fact that it's going to be the lowest of those 3 team selections, so likely a pick in the 50s, and then the 2030 second-rounder is Minnesota's own second. So with the way that they're currently constructed and built, they've got 4 tradable second-round picks to go along with non-tradable firsts. They can do swap options on 24, 28, and 30, so they have a little bit of flexibility there, but not a ton of trade flexibility from a draft pick standpoint, which means we're probably going to see a smaller buy move for this team if I had to guess. The cap table is really the biggest concern in Minnesota right now. This should be a bigger storyline than it honestly is, because this team, while they're super talented, this is the one long-term flaw that the team is going to run into. They don't have a lot of money to work with. They're currently $2.36 million below the tax line this season, and I think it's very imperative for them to stay below that tax line given their long-term team-building ramifications of entering it this year with how their cap table is constructed going forward. I just don't see it to be a very wise decision if they go into the tax this season. I would be relatively shocked by that decision if they do so. That's why I have 3 asterisks on that part of the graphic, because I want you guys to know that I just do not think they will go into the tax. I would be absolutely shocked by that. Next season, the reason why I don't want them to go into tax this year, next season they're projected to pay $172 million for only 8 guaranteed contracts. A big reason for that. Karl-Anthony Towns Supermax kicks in next season, the extension he signed a couple of years ago. Anthony Edwards, this past offseason, signed a designated rookie max extension. And if he makes All-NBA, that number is going to jump even higher. That 172 is projecting that he doesn't make All-NBA. So if Edwards makes All-NBA this year, which there's a real possibility of that, all of a sudden that number looks like $187 million. They are almost certainly going to be a second apron team next season, which means as the CBA fully kind of builds upon itself and we finally get all the full rules next season, this year of course being kind of a grace period for teams, the Wolves are going to be in a tough spot contract-wise. They're going to be in a really tricky situation. And they're, again, slated to be a second apron team almost certainly, unless there's some franchise-altering trade. We're not going to talk about that in this video. That will not happen this trade deadline. I would be 100% shocked by that if something crazy happened this year. But this offseason, you never know. It's going to depend on how the playoffs go for the Timberwolves. We'll see what that looks like later. So when it comes to expiring contracts, well, they have Mike Conley at a little bit over $24 million. I just can't see him getting traded. He's been too important, too vital for their team. He's obviously maximized Rudy Gobert much more since coming to Minnesota last year at the trade deadline in their deal with the Jazz. Kyle Anderson, he's really the hot name to talk about. There's a reason I have him on the graphic here at $9.22 million. He's a nice mid-sized contract that could help facilitate a deal somewhere. Although there's something I have to say about Kyle Anderson. He's a really darn good basketball player, and I know a lot of Timberwolves fans are a little bit lower on him right now. I am a big believer in Kyle Anderson's game. I do think Minnesota's roster construction, though, does make it challenging for a player like him who isn't really a ready shooter. He last year shot very well from 3, but again, he's a very reluctant shooter, which is totally okay. The NBA, it's fine to have 1 or 2 non-shooters on the floor as long as you have the right kind of shooting around those players. Minnesota, it's a little bit trickier though because they're a very big roster. McDaniels is huge. Obviously, he's comfortable playing off the catch though on the perimeter. But then Karl-Anthony Towns, he likes to drive the basketball. He's obviously a big body. Rudy Gobert, we know he's an inside focused center who mostly predominantly catches lobs. Slow-Mo's done a really nice job of feeding Gobert in their tenure together with Minnesota. Although this year's been trickier because Towns has been healthy. So there's just a lot of big bodies around the paint pretty much at all times in Timberwolves games, which is okay. And again, it's not that bad. They're number 1 in the West for a reason, but I do think it has negatively impacted Kyle Anderson's play this year as he's adjusted to playing around those big bodies a bit more with Towns fully healthy and on the floor this year. Shake Milton, he is under contract for $5 million this season and $5 million next year, although it is completely non-guaranteed next season, so you could look at him technically as an expiring contract in a trade. Troy Brown Jr., very same boat, $4 million this year, $4 million next year, and non-guaranteed next season. I think Troy Brown Jr. should get more minutes with the Timberwolves, if I'm being completely honest. He's a really solid shooter. I'm kind of surprised this year with how he's been shooting the basketball. Last year, he posted a career high with the Lakers from three-point land with his percentages. But I just wasn't sure how much that was going to hold up. Obviously, playing next to LeBron James kind of changes things. But he's shot the ball very well this year for the Timberwolves, too. So we'll see what happens with Troy Brown Jr., but I think he's a guy who could actually really be a nice piece in the Wolves' rotation if they play him a little bit more than they have been. And Jordan McLaughlin, he's on a vet's minimum. He's an expiring contract. Technically, I would be pretty surprised if he gets traded, though. So when we look at team needs and flaws, what really is wrong with this team? And it's hard to pick out things that, hey, look, this team is not good at this area, especially when you're number 1 in the West, 20 games above 500. You just assume, hey, they're really good at a lot of things, and that's the truth. They're very good defensively. Their point of attack defense is great. Their rim protection is elite with Rudy Gobert. I think their ball movement is relatively good. They do a lot of things pretty well, but I think it's just more of a spacing and kind of pace decision-making type of issue right now in Minnesota. I think just with their turnover issue and kind of how little they shoot from three-point land, they could just use, again, more pace and space into their offense. They're not a great offensive team. Mediocre at best is what I would classify them as. They're second to last in the NBA right now in three-point attempts per game as a team. So because of that, that's really the first thing to look at is how do we get more three-pointers up? They are a very good shooting team when they shoot them. They have good shooters. Naz Reid's shooting the ball very well. Karl-Anthony Towns is shooting the ball at an elite level. Mike Conley shoots the ball very, very well. Anthony Edwards, when he's on, doesn't seem like he's capable of missing. So even though they don't shoot a ton of threes, they're very good at it, but they just need, again, more guys who just are comfortable, quick trigger, shoot guys. And I think that will open things up for this team, whether that be a guard or a wing. I think with Nickeil Alexander-Walker, you could look at him as either position right now. Is he your backup point guard, or is he really a starting, or like a backup shooting guard, small forward? And I think with that flexibility, it gives the Wolves flexibility at the trade deadline to target whatever player becomes available that fits these needs. They need someone who, again, is a floor stretcher and a quick decision maker. That could be a small forward, that could be a shooting guard, it could be a point guard. And I think with Nickeil Alexander-Walker, you have the flexibility to target whichever player becomes available that you think best fits the actual team and their current needs, rather than worrying about positional size, because Nickeil is pretty sizey, lengthy, and can guard up and down a lineup, which we've seen him do this year. I think really the one thing is, if they do something big, a wing who can shoot off the bounce would be really nice. Now, that could be said about all 30 NBA teams. Every team would love a wing who's able to handle the basketball, get his own shot. I don't really see the Timberwolves being able to pull something like that off this year, just given their lack of draft picks to trade and really kind of the contractual difficulties. With that, if there's a wing who's able to shoot the ball pretty well off the bounce, they're probably making more than $15 million a year. So given the Timberwolves' kind of current situation with the luxury tax and just where they're at in general as a team, it would be hard to find that. But if you could, it would be awesome for the team, and I think it would really help their status as possible contenders this season. So who are some potential trade targets that I like quite a bit for this team? I wrote a piece on Bogdan Bogdanovic. There's rumors right now circulating about Bogdanovic being a player who the Timberwolves have monitored this season. I just don't see that as a very likely outcome. He is making $18.7 million this year. He is on a descending contract, which is pretty fair value. But again, given the Wolves' cap space situation going into this offseason and their luxury tax and apron status, Bogdanovic just adds more money into that mix, and I just can't really see that being a great outcome for them. Tyus Jones of the Wizards, he has an asterisk next to his name as well, because he makes $14 million a year. And that can be pretty challenging for a team to swallow that type of contract. Now, if you're looking at it from a Kyle Anderson plus Shake Milton plus a couple draft picks that are second rounders or something, that's something that's doable. But again, you'd have to fill a roster spot after doing that, so you get really close to the tax line. So you have to be kind of cautious if you're Minnesota, but I wouldn't completely rule something like that out. Luke Kennard, another player on a pretty decently sized contract. That's why there's asterisks next to his name, as well as Jones and Bogdanovic. The bigger contracts, those are ones that the Wolves have to be a little bit more wary about. They have to be patient and look at their cap table and say, does this make sense? Kennard, I mean, he's a lights out shooter though. He could definitely help the team, and his kind of floor spacing would be elite. He's one of the best shooters in the NBA on, I guess, relatively low volume. He's kind of a passive player at times, but with the Wolves having Edwards and Towns and Conley, I think Kennard being a passive floor spacer isn't that bad for them, although he is relatively expensive for that kind of role, which is okay. Dennis Schroeder I have for the Toronto Raptors. This is where Nickeil's positional flexibility really comes in. Dennis Schroeder is a point guard, and he's really quick. He's got a lot of good pace in his game. He changes direction really well. I mean, you guys know Dennis Schroeder and what he does on the floor. I think he's going to be a positive addition for whatever team acquires him this trade deadline if the Raptors do trade him, and I think there's good reason for the Raptors to consider that, given the fact that they've already kind of enabled themselves as sellers after trading away both OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam. There's rumors Bruce Brown might get rerouted as well, which I would not bet against at this point. And then Schroeder, I mean, the fact that they acquired Emmanuel Quickley, they've already given Quickley that starting spot for good reason. Quickley's a really good young player. They're doing the exact thing I would do by starting him, giving him a lot of minutes, a high role, high usage. Those are all great things. It makes Dennis Schroeder just more expendable. A veteran player for a team that is kind of entering a rebuild and a retooling around Scotty Barnes. Schroeder is definitely someone who would be available, and at the right price. He doesn't make that much money on his contract. I think the Timberwolves would be better with Dennis Schroeder on the team, and I think his kind of quick decision-making and downhill ability would probably open some things up in their offense for sure. Then there's two Brooklyn Nets on here that I would love to see in Minnesota. Royce O'Neal would be a reunion of Jazz players. O'Neal, Conley, and Gobert played together with Utah for quite some time. So Royce O'Neal could probably enter into the fold. He'd be pretty comfortable playing with those two guys, playing off of them on offense, while also still kind of bringing in a little bit more of the defensive-minded mentality. He doesn't really improve the offense that much in Minnesota, which is why I'm a little bit lower on him than some of the other names on this list, because I think if Minnesota wants to be really a true contender, I think that they have to get just a small amount better on offense. You have to be a top 15-ish offense if you're going to have the #1 defense in the league. This isn't 1980. This isn't 2006. Like, you need to have a really good defense and a really good offense to win NBA titles now, and I think the Wolves are just missing a little bit on offense, so Royce O'Neal doesn't tackle that as much for me. Dorian Finney-Smith, not much of an offensive player either, although I think his role would actually help Minnesota's offense because he's a very reliable corner sitter. That's what he did his entire career with the Dallas Mavericks, playing off of Luka Doncic. And yes, the Wolves do not have a Luka Doncic level player. They don't have a player who plays in that style, but I think just someone who's comfortable spacing out to the corner. He's a quick trigger, ready to shoot player off the catch. That could help off of Karl Anthony Towns post-ups. That could help off of Anthony Edwards drives. And when Jaden McDaniels checks out of the game, Dorian Finney-Smith could be your premier point of attack defender still. Probably would come off the bench for this team, which is a huge home run if you can bring him and Nickeil Alexander-Walker off the bench. Your defense almost never has a drop-off then at their point of attack, ball contain, which is the hardest part in basketball right now. DFS would be a fantastic addition for Minnesota. He's on a decent contract that I think is affordable. Again, you have the long-term tax implications, but Minnesota's already at a spot where that's going to be tricky for them anyway. So making a run at an affordable player like DFS does make some sense. And then the player that I think does just all around make good sense for them as well here, Doug McDermott. Cheap contract. The Spurs are not good this year. That's not Victor Wembanyama's fault, by the way. There's a lot of reasons why San Antonio is not very good, and that's okay for them. But if McDermott does become available, which I'm sure he is available this trade deadline, the Timberwolves should consider him strongly. He's just been a very good three-point shooter throughout his career, off of movement, playing standstill off the catch. He is just a lights-out three-point shooter and comfortable in that role, smart in that role. And listen, I know this probably subtracts from the Wolves' defense a little bit if McDermott's playing 15-20 minutes a game, but it's going to help boost their offense a bit. If they drop from #1 in the defense category down to #2 or 3, that's not that drastic of a change, and the whole hope would be then that their offense goes from 18th to 20th all the way up to maybe 15th, 13th, 14th, somewhere in that realm. And I think even McDermott, who isn't that great of a player overall, still could help them in that area. So when it comes to my final predictions, I think they're going to send out some salary now for a better fit at either a point guard or wing spot, collection of young, unproven pieces to dangle to other teams, whether that be Wendell Moore. I would hate to see them trade Leonard Miller. I think Leonard Miller's got a really bright future in the league as a very productive forward who's going to rebound and score the basketball at a pretty high rate for his minutes. I just would hate to see them give up on him, even though, yes, I know that they have a chance to really contend for a title this year. I don't think selling off Leonard Miller makes much sense, in my opinion. I expect them to stay below the tax line for sure. That's like a guarantee. I would be very shocked if they don't do that. And I think they make a small buy move. And I think that small buy move, if I had to guess right now, I would say Doug McDermott's the most likely option. Although I would love to see them get aggressive for someone maybe even like a Royce O'Neal, although again, offensively doesn't really help them as much. There's a lot of pieces out there. Dennis Schroeder, I would love to see with the Timberwolves. I think he would really help their offense. I think just kind of the pace and decision-making would be pretty nice for them. But overall, I mean, the Wolves are in a great spot. They've done a lot of things very, very well this season. And I think just one small upgrade on the margins, finding a 9th guy in their rotation that Chris Finch trusts and can rely upon, who's a veteran, will go a long way in helping this team really feel comfortable. A couple of players I haven't mentioned in this video that I did want to, but I wasn't exactly sure if they're realistic. Seth Curry of the Dallas Mavericks. I'm not sure the Mavs would be in a spot where they're willing to give him up, but he makes only $4 million. He's on a biannual exception number. He would be fantastic with the Timberwolves, and I think he's the exact type of, hey, quick trigger three-point shooter, but also a quick decision maker, gets on and off the basketball quickly. I would love to see him with the Wolves, and I also think someone who has a history with Tim Connolly, the president of basketball operations for the Timberwolves, Bones Highland. The Clippers are likely going to make him available for trade. Any little bit of money that the Clippers saved this year goes a long way in helping them financially. Just obviously not a huge concern because they have Steve Ballmer as their owner, but I mean, trading out a player who's not in their rotation to save a little bit of money does make some sense for them. And if they could net a 2nd-round pick or something for him from the Wolves, that could theoretically make some good deal of sense here too. So Seth Curry, Bones Highland, 2 players I wanted to mention in this video, but just didn't have a really great spot in this video to talk about, so I wanted to attach it here at the end. Thank you all so much for watching. I really enjoyed talking about the Minnesota Timberwolves in this video. If you are a Timberwolves fan, again, go make sure to follow me on Twitter, my personal, as well as go follow the Utility Sports Twitter. Links are in the description for that. Go follow us on Instagram and go join that Discord server. There's going to be a lot of activity in there with the trade deadline right around the corner. A lot of people are buzzing about, hey, what trades are going to happen this year. So make sure to go check that out. Thanks again, everyone, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.